I'm a facilitator with Sarah and Millie Carmichael for delivering Think Like a Tree online. And so this is going to be an interactive workshop, but please only share as much or as little as you wish to. I am going to ask people to sort of introduce themselves and do a bit of a go round, but if you don't feel comfortable to share, that's fine. And we're also going to be doing some little interactive exercises. We'll be using the chat as well, so so just take as much or as little out of this as you feel comfortable with. I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, is that showing okay for everyone?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so Sarah Spencer, who created Think Like a Tree, as I say, she herself suffers from a chronic illness, and she used the natural principles that she observed in nature around her, some of which are drawn from the tradition of permaculture, as I said, but some are others that she just simply observed in nature herself, living as she does in the countryside in Derbyshire on a small holding. So this process, I became involved with Sarah through knowing her through permaculture circles, but also I did the course a few years ago with her, and then went on to do the facilitator course. And I've used this process in my life in a number of different ways. I've used it for designing different ways of thinking about work, for thinking about my own health and well-being, and also for one of the designs that I did was about overcoming internalized sexism and the challenges of historic abuse in my own family. So there are many ways that you can use this kind of process, and what it really does is to look at how nature deals with things and to see how we can learn from that to help us to thrive even when we're challenged. So this is me. I'm one leaf in a forest. I'm not going to read all of these things, but I think one of the things that it's really useful to do, and one of the techniques that we use on Think Like a Tree, especially if you're feeling a bit low about yourself, is simply to list all of the many things that you do, and all the many ways that you are a persona in the world, all the many ways that you help other people, and to see yourselves and see all of ourselves as one leaf in a massive forest of people who are living in these turbulent times and trying to make the world a better place. And by and large, I do believe that most people are trying to make the world a better place. So we are together a forest of people, and not all on our own. So today's workshop, I'm going to ask people to, if they feel comfortable, to introduce themselves a little bit, but just in terms of who you are, and if you have any prior knowledge of Think Like a Tree, but also if there's anything that you feel able to share about what you're finding challenging at the moment, just in one sentence, not in a, just, you know, it might be the climate crisis or COVID or work or home or whatever, but just one thing that you're maybe finding challenging. So the chat will be open the whole time if people want to put comments in there. We're going to do a little visualization, so if you feel comfortable with that, you can close your eyes during that part, but you don't have to. And then we're going to look at how the natural principles can help us on our journey. And then I'll just spend a little bit of time talking more about the process side of Think Like a Tree and how we can actually use that in a practical way in our life, and the kind of courses that we run to help people to do that. So if you feel able to, I'm going to stop sharing in a sec, but if we could just do a quick go round, and if you would say your name, and also if you would share your pronouns. Is this your first experience of Think Like a Tree? And again, if you're anything that you feel is a challenge to you currently. Okay, so why do we have so much to learn from trees? So we actually share quite a lot of the genetic material with trees, but trees have actually been around on the planet for longer than we have. So effectively, the kind of solutions that trees come up with for surviving even under pressure are really they have evolved under a long time, a long period, 3.8 billion years. There's been some sort of tree life on Earth. So they've managed to come up with ways of dealing with all kinds of changes of circumstance. So, and if we look at the underlying principles of how they go about this, I know this is kind of personifying trees, and I'm not saying that trees are sentient beings and that they're thinking about this, but if we look at how they've actually evolved to solve problems, we can learn a lot from it. So if we think about this kind of idea of why are trees the shape that they are? Why do trees have branches? You might want to, if you want to join into this discussion, you can pop things in the chat. But if we look in nature, we will see these repeating patterns. We'll see these branching patterns in lots and lots of different places. And the reason that that pattern has evolved is because it's a really, really great way of distributing nutrients and of taking things in. So putting things into the environment around us and taking things out of the environment. A branching pattern is really, really useful for that. It makes really efficient use of space. It makes really efficient use of time, and it maximizes the benefit. And you will see that for a tree, not only do they have the branching pattern above the ground where you can see it, where they're using that pattern to get their leaves out to maximize sunlight falling on the leaves. You'll also see that underneath the ground as well. So this idea of having a very strong trunk, a very strong center, but then having other parts that reflect that but go out into the wider world, this is a very strong pattern. It makes the tree very able to center itself in its environment. So in each of these kind of ways that we're going to be looking at trees, we're going to be thinking about what is the underlying natural principle here. So one of the principles that we see in nature is how nature catches and uses energy efficiently. So with that example of the branching, you can see that the leaves on a deciduous tree, on a tree that drops its leaves, the branches will put the leaves out there, but they won't shade each other. They will actually be held by the twigs into a position where they can capture the most possible sunlight. And then when the sunlight falls away in the winter on a deciduous tree, those leaves will then fall back into the ground, and the energy that is in there will then go into the soil where it's most useful. The tree will pull its energy back into the trunk and start to form buds again. So it's never completely dead or gone. It's always doing something, but it's completely matching its energy with what is around it. So this is a really interesting way of thinking about our lives, is that quite often we're battling, just to do the same things all year round, every week, just be able to do the same things, rather than looking at where our internal energy is and how we can best utilize that by fitting in with the seasons, with our own biorhythms, and with our own needs on a particular day. So I'm just going to invite you for a moment to, if you want to, you can close your eyes for this, and just take yourself on a nice safe path, nice even path. You're not going to trip over. Just have a little walk around a woodland in your mind. You can go in whichever season you like. I particularly like spring in a woodland, but so this time of year, and just have a little walk through and let all of your senses come into play. See what you can smell and hear and see, and what does it feel like inside a woodland? What kind of things are going on? And if that woodland is healthy and vibrant, what is it that makes that woodland feel healthy and vibrant? What are the characteristics of the woodland that make it feel so alive? So we've just been through, obviously, this year of the pandemic. And we are on a planet that has numerous issues going on in terms of social justice, in terms of climate change, in terms of personal stresses in people's lives. And so when we look to nature, one of the things that we can see in the natural world is that life is a struggle. We might as well accept this before we try and do something about it. It's good to actually accept that we're not going to feel good all the time, because we are facing a lot of challenges. So a nice example of this, of how we can overcome this, though, is to just keep trying to do something. And the saguaro cactus in the Sonoran Desert, which is a place where I spent a bit of time in my life, it has to produce 14 million seeds in a lifetime, and possibly only one will grow into a full-grown plant. So, you know, and yet once they're there, they last for a long time, and they root, and they are amazing, and they provide loads of habitat for lots of other things. So if we start from this point of view that life is a struggle, but there is so much that we can do about it. So at this point, we're going to go into breakout rooms. And again, this will be about, if we just spend 5 minutes in breakout rooms. So Maria, I'm not quite sure how many people are totally in the room now, but if we can get groups of 3, that would be good.
Yeah.
And we're just going to go back to those things that we thought were a challenge, and just have 5 minutes just to chat through, just acknowledging whatever struggles we're having, and again, only share as much as you want to, and then when we come out of this, we're going to start to look at how those principles can help us to work on these. So one of the things we see in nature is this sort of these repeating patterns, but how we grow and how we thrive really does depend a lot on the environment around us. And I think it's one of the things to remember is that you're never going to grow into a big African snail if you've only got an environment that supports you being a garden snail. So, you know, don't be too hard on yourselves, you know, work within the limits that you have around you. And you know, what the garden snails are doing there is they're a lot smaller than the African snail, but they're working together and they're doing a really good job. So let's just bear in mind that there are different ways of working. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of the natural principles. So in Sarah's book, there are about 42 of these different natural principles that she groups into different ways of looking at things. And so we're going to go through some of these, and then what they really are little thinking tools that you can use if you're having a difficulty or a challenge, that you can pick up on this principle and think, well, how would that help me in my life? So as we're going through these, if anybody wants to put any comments in the chat about the principle or how it could be used to solve the challenges that you're facing, then please feel free to do that. And this is just a selection of the natural principles. As I say, there are 42 in the book, and when we do the courses, we go through quite a lot of these. We'll touch on a lot more of these. So this is a really key thing for me, is this idea that if we live with purpose, of living with purpose. So there's been a lot of research done that people are much more likely to have good mental health and to lead happier lives, basically, if they feel like they're doing something beyond just meeting their own basic needs. So particularly when we do things for community, or we do things for family, or for the wider world, or we just have a really strong sense of why we're doing something, then that can really help us to have robust mental health, even when things around us are quite difficult. There is this quote from Nietzsche: if you have a why, you can withstand almost any how. And I think you see examples of that all around you in the world, of people that have got a really strong sense of why they are doing stuff. And when we do Think Like a Tree courses, one of the things that I've noticed, particularly sort of during the pandemic, is people actually floundering a little bit with this and saying, you know, I'm not quite sure. I don't quite know what I want to be doing. What is my purpose? And using some of these techniques and referring to some of the other principles can really help with that. So there is another principle which is about finding your niche, finding the little bit of the world that you can make a difference in, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. We don't all have to change the entire world, but if we find the right niche, then that can really give us a sense of self-fulfillment and self-purpose. So this is a really interesting one, I think, and this is based on the fact that that when we have got harm within us or something has happened that has knocked us back, that trees have this amazing ability to self-heal. And what the tree will do is that it will carry on growing, and it will adapt around the thing that's caused damage. It won't necessarily cure the damage, but it will manage to live with some of the damage. So I think this is again a really important principle, that firstly you can heal yourself, that you have the power to some extent to heal yourself, particularly from emotional damage, but also that you're not necessarily going to remove the thing that caused the damage. And you will see trees that kind of grow around nails and iron spikes and all sorts of things, and just carry on growing. And then you will also see this principle with trees a lot, that you know, trees will shed what they don't need anymore, that they take what they need from the environment, but they will shed what they don't need. And then, but the stuff that they shed is still useful to the rest of the ecosystem. So when we have this beautiful kind of leaf fall that happens with the deciduous trees, every bit of that growth that the tree has put on in the previous year will then go back into the soil and then be feeding the rest of the ecosystem. So the stuff that you don't need, you know, may be of use to other people, both in a physical and in an emotional sense. This is a really important one, I think. I think in a way the pandemic has created this pause for people, and that people have really appreciated. And so, you know, there's been a lot of feedback to us on, you know, courses and a lot of the stuff that I've done around gardening as well, where people have said, oh wow, you know, it's been amazing. I went for walks that I never went for before. You know, you could hear bird song and all of that kind of thing. But recognizing that this idea of taking time to pause is something that in our Western kind of capitalist world quite often we don't have. And having this sort of enforced on us by the pandemic, I think has allowed people to really see that it's important to build that into our lives. And we can do that by building in pause in a day. So, I mean, I know some of the people in the room probably have a yoga practice or some period or a breathing practice that allows you to just take that pause within each day, but also applying that need to pause, you know, in our cycles as well, in the yearly cycle or the monthly cycle or whatever, just allowing ourselves time to step back, because when we're constantly doing, our systems just don't have time to reboot. So nature does this a lot. Obviously the most obvious thing about this is the sort of the winter pause, when things tend to again go back into the center, go back into, they're not stopping, but the energy of the plant or the tree goes back inwards, and allows the tree to recuperate enough to be able to then get the energy for the spring bursting that will come. So if you are feeling if you have periods where you feel low, or you just self-contain a little bit, allow that pause to happen, and know that the buds are still in there and that they're getting ready to ripen. So this is a really important principle, I think, of following nature's patterns. And when we do think like a tree, as well as thinking about the word principles, we also think about the patterns. So in nature, you see these recurring patterns. We talked a little bit about the branching pattern, which you see all over the place. You see that in not just in trees, but also in kind of river systems on a macro scale, and within our own bodies in terms of things like our arteries and our lungs. You see these same patterns recurring. And what you'll find in nature is that the patterns that occur allow this kind of co-evolution of things that are going to cooperate. So for example, the bee and the flower, they have co-evolved. The patterns that they adopt, and the flowers are specifically designed to allow the bee to come and pollinate. The honeycomb is the best and most efficient use of space and time for creating the food that is going to then feed the queen in the hive. And we'll see these kind of the spider's web, for example, these kind of netting patterns or web patterns. They're incredibly strong and they're incredibly resilient. And we can see that kind of in our own lives, if we have webs of connection with different people, that they are more resilient than if we just do things in a straight line. So what we don't see in nature very often are right angles or straight lines. We see these kind of patterns that have this strength and resilience, you know, spirals. They build incrementally on the thing that's gone before. So you don't try to overreach yourself, because you're building each time on the thing that's gone before. And accepting that our life has wave patterns in it as well. So we're not going to be able to do everything at the same intensity all the time. Things are going to ebb and flow. So if we start to use these patterns to kind of relate to what's going on for ourselves emotionally and also practically, then very often we can actually sort of look at where we're at and accept the fact that okay, we're at the bottom of a wave, but the wave will start to go up again soon, and so on. So this is a principle that nature does, and that can really, really help us in our lives, is if we work from patterns to detail. So one of the ways that we can often get very, very stressed is if we're thinking about lots and lots of little details. If we step back and look at the overall pattern, so the big pattern, and then work with the details. So use that same idea of things branching out. So you can think of your overall vision for your life, or whatever thing you want to work on, as being the pattern, and then your short-term goals and actions as being the details, and work first from the big picture and then fill in the details. So I think we mentioned this before, you know, if we cultivate cooperative relationships, so we're often told that nature is competitive, and to some degree it is, but more and more science is discovering that nature is actually quite cooperative, and that things will support each other. So for example, in permaculture, I think a few people mentioned gardening earlier on. So in our food gardens, for example, rather than just growing things in straight rows, you know, we can plant things together that support each other. So there's a very classic group of plants that are quite often grown together in South America called the Three Sisters, which is corn, squash and beans. I don't know if any of you've heard of that. And the idea is that the corn provides the support for the beans. The beans help to take nitrogen from the soil, and then that feeds all of the plants in the guild. And then the squash cover the ground, so they shade out any of the weeds. And the three actually work together to make the best use of space, light, time, and energy. But they each have their own characteristics, and I think this is one of the things that we can learn from. And as I said, when you know the leaves on the tree, they're all kind of equally valuable, but they don't shade each other out, and they're all doing their own thing, being part of the whole. So this is a very important kind of principle in nature, is of sharing the abundance, that things in nature don't tend to take more than they need. You know, there is no kind of wealth accumulation within nature. And I think this is something, again, that very much during the pandemic, you know, I saw in my own neighborhoods that people were really doing this, that people really kind of stepped up to take care of each other, and particularly with things like distributing food and, you know, helping people to get hold of medicines and that kind of thing. That there was a kind of web of connections that grew up during the pandemic through the kind of neighborhood support groups. And then a lot of people sharing abundance of time, in particular, you know, putting time into supporting their neighbours and making sure their neighbours were okay. So, you know, we have this capacity. If we allow ourselves to do this, you know, I think it's quite natural for us to want to share abundance and to enjoy sharing. This is another principle, value your uniqueness. So this is, you know, trees can grow in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and trees can, you know, if a branch blows off and the tree doesn't look, you know, as pretty as the other trees, the tree just carries on growing anyway. it's really important. I think there's a transition principle. Marie mentioned that I'm part of something called the Transition Towns movement, which is really about how we can live on the planet and not contribute so much to global heating. So looking at how we can reduce our own use of fossil fuels and that kind of thing. And one of the things about the transition movement is that it has this underlying principle of everyone is needed. Each person has something to contribute, you know, and every part of the sort of the wider society, the wider ecosystem relies on having these unique individuals. Because if everything is the same, if we just have a monoculture, if we just have one type of tree, it only takes one kind of weather change or one kind of disease to wipe all of that out. The more diversity that we have, the stronger the overall system is. So, you know, if you are feeling challenged in your own life, just think about what your unique things are that you bring, you know, to any situation. And think about what nourishes and replenishes you, even if that's something different from the people around you. Okay, so one of the things that we do on the Think Like a Tree course is we do a Know Your Actions Can Change the World. So we just sit and throw into the chat like different little things that we can do that would make a difference to the world. And if anybody wants to contribute any of those, that would be great. I can't actually see the chat, Maria. Has anything come up? Any comments or?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. So this is one thing that natural systems do, which is the idea of edge and margins. So in an ecosystem, the point that is most diverse and most vibrant and has the most life going on, the most activity going on, will always be the edge between two different systems. So for example, with a pond, it will always be the edges of the pond where the water meets the land, that there will be most activity and life and diversity. Or in a woodland, it will be the edge of the woodland where the woodland meets a field and there is more light coming in, or in a glade where there's trees and then open ground, that you will get this amazing buzz and activity. And I think particularly at the moment where we've all been very kind of, you know, closed away from each other because of the pandemic, I think people are just beginning to start to come out from their edges, you know, into the wider world, and to start to enjoy that diversity again and that interaction that occurs where people meet. Because where people meet is, you know, that's like the edges of an ecosystem. And if we think about this in the kind of the widest sense, the whole planet, we live on this tiny, tiny little bit of the planet, really, which is the surface between the earth and the air, for the most part. That edge is where so much activity happens. All of our human activity happens within that edge. And so it's really interesting metaphorically, I think, to think about your life in terms of where is your edge, where's your comfort zone, and is it possible to reach beyond that? But also, where are the places, again going back to that uniqueness thing, where are the places that you interact and where you can actually have most effect? So thinking about the edges and margins in your life, again, is a nice little thinking tool. So that's just a kind of, that's a kind of overall little summary of some of the principles that they're a bit piecemeal. And actually in the book, as I said, there's 42 of these that allow you to kind of think about things in the context of your life, to think about what kind of patterns you're working with, and also what kind of principles that would apply. So when we're doing the course for Think Like a Tree, what we do is we have there's myself and Sarah and Millie who are the facilitators, and we all come from slightly different backgrounds that we bring to it. But the course is a 6-week, well, it works on different formats, but generally it's the online version is a 6-week, 2.5-hour course, each week. And we go through the kind of the natural principles, and then we build up a toolkit of exercises that you can do to help you to bring those natural principles to life in your life. And each person coming on the course comes up with an idea of something that they want to design differently, that they want to consciously change in their life. And then we use the natural principles, the toolkit, and then something called a design cycle to then help people to create that design. So this is the design cycle that we use. If you've ever done any kind of permaculture, you'll be familiar with the idea of a design cycle. If it's totally new to you, then what it really is a series of steps that help you to make conscious change in your life by going through a process and by having stages that allow you to look at things from different perspectives. So the starting point of any design cycle is always observation. You know, what am I observing at the moment, either about myself or about my circumstances? And then the next part of that is to decide what it is that you want to change. So what is your vision or your purpose in having a design? So that could be anything from we've had people decluttering their houses, we've had people making major life changes, people applying this to work situations, people applying it to their own health. So once you've decided what it is that you want to work on, what we then look at is all the things that are around you that help you, and that could be anything from material helps, it could be money, it could be family, it could be resources, it could be knowledge, it could be anything that's going to help you in achieving that purpose. And then we work on what might limit you, and we've got a whole series of exercises for looking at what holds us back and how we can then work with that. So there are a series of little tools, little thinking tools that we can use that help us to see what our limits are, but also how we can overcome them. And then there's a little part of the design cycle which is about, okay, right, we've identified where we're at, we've identified what we want to do, we know what's helping us, we know what's limiting us, what are we going to do? And so we're looking for ideas and inspiration. So that's a kind of like very wide kind of creative process of just, you know, coming up with anything, not putting a barrier to anything happening at that point, just letting yourself think about whatever you want. If you want to be a millionaire, if you want to go to Iceland, if you want to, whatever you want to do at this point in the design, just put all those ideas down. If you want to go and live in, you know, in the middle of a woodland and never come out again, you know, whatever your ideas are, that's fine, just at this stage. And then we start to work on a more practical level of, well, how would we choose between these different ideas, what's actually practically achievable, until we can come up with a design and plan and then take action on it. And then there's this really important part of the design cycle, which is then, having taken some action, how do we maintain that in our lives? So, for example, if we're breaking habits or we're doing something new, how do we keep that momentum going? You know, how does it not just become a bit of a flash in the pan? So, and the last few stages of the design cycle are really about then how we can work out if the things that we're doing have achieved what we wanted them to achieve, and then had to celebrate our achievements, and then this all important time of pause. So this is not, it's a kind of cycle. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. You don't have to do everything in the same order. But all of these stages are drawn from looking at how natural systems do things successfully, and each natural system will have built in some kind of element of each of these things.